The asphalt on Highway 58 east of Barstow bakes differently than other roads. It does not merely absorb the sun, it hoards it, storing the heat through the long, brutal afternoon until it radiates back upward in visible waves that make the distant horizon shimmer and dissolve like a fever dream. The road looks wet from a quarter-mile away. It never is. Rex Hendricks had been walking since before dawn, and he knew the mirage for what it was. He had learned not to trust things that looked like relief. His left shoe was losing its argument with gravity. The rubber sole had separated from the canvas upper somewhere at around mile 8, and now it flopped with every step, a pathetic smack and scrape rhythm against the hot pavement that he could not quiet and could not fix. He had tried duct tape in Barstow, but the desert heat had softened the adhesive within 20 minutes, and the tape peeled back like old skin. The shoe stayed on by friction and stubbornness alone. His right sock had worn through at the heel and was balling up under his arch, rubbing a hot spot that had long since crossed from discomfort into a low-throbbing burn he had simply decided not to think about. He was 15, though the gauntness of his cheeks and the permanent hunch of his shoulders made people read him as younger. The hunch was not sadness, it was strategy. A smaller profile attracted less attention. He had learned that in his second placement, a group home in Stockton, where the older boys operated on a simple territorial logic, anything that looked like weakness was an invitation. He had spent 3 months making himself invisible before his caseworker finally moved him again. His backpack held everything he owned, and it was not much. A change of socks still dry, a gray hooded sweatshirt with a bleach stain across the left shoulder, a ballpoint pen with no cap, a folded page torn from a California road atlas showing the stretch between Barstow and Needles, a half-eaten sleeve of saltine crackers he had taken from a gas station rack outside of town, sliding it under his waistband while the attendant was watching a video on his phone. He was not proud of it. Hunger had a way of making the distinction between ethics and survival feel abstract, like an argument you could only afford to have after eating. He had not eaten since those crackers. That was going on 9 hours. The last placement, the one he had run from 2 days before, had been a house in Barstow that smelled of cigarette smoke embedded so deeply into the drywall it felt structural. The foster father, a man named Garland, with thick forearms and a short fuse, had backhanded Rex across the left ear for dropping a coffee mug. Not hard enough to leave a mark the county would photograph. Hard enough to make Rex's vision white out for 3 seconds and produce a ringing in his ear that had not fully stopped. Rex had waited until Garland was asleep that night, pulled on his shoes in the dark, shouldered his backpack, and stepped out through the kitchen door into the desert night. He had been walking east with no particular destination in mind, just the understanding that east was away, and away was the only address that mattered. He was not thinking about the future. People in his situation did not have the luxury of the future. They had the next hour and then the hour after that, and decisions were made accordingly. Right now, the decision was whether to stay on the highway's shoulder, where the ground was flat, but the sun was direct, or to drop down into the arroyo running alongside the road where there was shade from the cut bank, but the loose, decomposed granite would shred his shoes faster. He stayed on the shoulder. The shoes were already shredded. A pickup passed him going west, the first vehicle he had seen in 40 minutes. It did not slow. The driver did not look at him. Rex did not wave. He had learned that the ritual of waving at passing cars was for people who expected to be seen. The afternoon deepened. The shadows on the highway grew marginally longer. The heat did not diminish. Rex was thinking about water, specifically the absence of it. His mouth had that chalky coating that meant early dehydration, a fine film of dried saliva and dust that tasted like old pennies and exhaust. He had finished his last bottle somewhere around mile 12. There was a truck stop at a place called Ludlow, marked on his torn atlas page, maybe another 9 miles east. 9 miles in this heat without water was a calculation with a real answer. He was doing the math without drama, the way you thought about it when it was not a hypothetical. Then he heard it. He heard it before he saw it. A high-pitched shriek of rubber losing its grip on asphalt, the sound of tires in a losing argument with the road. It rose fast, peaked, and was immediately swallowed by a heavier, more catastrophic sound. Rex turned. A quarter-mile back down the highway, a black Ford Mustang GT was no longer driving. It was describing an arc. The rear end had stepped out to the left, and the driver had overcorrected hard to the right, And the physics of that correction applied to a rear-wheel drive car moving at what Rex later estimated must have been 90 miles an hour had done what physics always does in those situations. It took over. The front right tire caught the gravel shoulder. The car dug in. The suspension compressed and the rear end continued its rotation, and then the whole machine went sideways, and the edge of the asphalt acted as a ramp, and the Mustang went airborne. It rolled. Rex counted 3 complete rotations. Later, turning it over in his mind, he thought he might have miscounted. But it was 3. He was sure of 3. Each rotation produced its own specific percussion. The initial impact of boom so concussive he felt it in his sternum. Then the shriek and tear of the roof being sheared off its pillars. Then the collapse of the chassis. Then the slide. The car came to rest upside down in the drainage ditch that ran alongside the highway 60 feet off the shoulder, the undercarriage pointing at the sky, all 4 wheels gone still. Dust rose in a massive brown curtain, caught the horizontal afternoon light, and drifted slowly east. Rex stood on the shoulder and breathed. His first thought was not noble. He would acknowledge that later honestly without excusing it. His first thought was purely mechanical. Cars that rolled ejected things. Change wallets, phones. He had learned that from a kid in Stockton who had supplemented his income by arriving first at accident scenes before the police and working the surrounding dirt methodically. A $20 bill could buy 2 days of gas station calories. A phone could be wiped and sold. His mind made this calculation automatically the way it made all survival calculations without sentiment, without ceremony. He jogged toward the wreck. The heat coming off the undercarriage hit him 20 feet out, a dry wall of radiance far more intense than the sun above. The air was saturated with the smell of hot metal and something sweet and chemical, the sharp tang of antifreeze mingling with something darker and heavier underneath. He identified the darker smell a moment later when he saw the liquid spreading across the desert floor beneath the crumpled roof. Gasoline. It was pooling in a shallow depression in the sandy soil, dark and iridescent, catching the sun and throwing it back in oily rainbows. It spread in a slow radius outward from the fuel tank area, which had been breached by the rolling impact, and the spread reached the nearest cluster of dry cheatgrass at the base of the ditch bank. Rex slowed. He circled the wreck at a cautious distance, eyes working the ground. Chrome trim pieces, a sandal, the rear view mirror face down in the dirt, the jack from the trunk bent at an angle it was not designed for. No wallet, no bag. He was close enough now to hear the engine ticking as it cooled a rapid metallic percussion like a clock being wound down. Close enough to hear something else. A sound that was not metal. It was faint and wet and came from inside the crushed cabin. Rex stopped. He bent slightly, bringing his eye level closer to the upside-down passenger window, which no longer had any glass in it. The frame was warped inward on the driver's side, crushed by the roll, but the passenger opening was still roughly intact. He looked inside. She was hanging by the seatbelt. The inertia reel had locked at some point in the roll and had not released, leaving her suspended upside down with the belt cutting hard across her collarbone and hips. Her arms hung below her head. Her dark hair fell loose and was matted with blood from a gash near her hairline, the blood following gravity downward into her hair, rather than across her face. She was maybe 18 or 19, hard to tell with the blood. She was wearing a black, long-sleeve thermal beneath a heavy leather vest. The vest was thick and well-worn. The leather softened to a dark matte finish that spoke of years of use rather than weeks. The patches on it were what made Rex step back. He was not encyclopedic on motorcycle clubs. He did not need to be. The iconography was unmistakable enough. The top rocker with block letters, the bottom rocker with a chapter designation, and between them a center patch that combined a skeletal figure, outstretched wings, and a color combination of red and black that meant exactly what you thought it meant to people who traveled the kind of roads Rex traveled. Carrion Riders MC. He knew the name the way you knew the names of things you needed to avoid. They were not the largest club in California, but they had a chapter in Barstow and 3 others along the I-40 corridor, and their reputation was specific enough that even the men in the group home in Stockton, men who were themselves not gentle, spoke of them in a different register. Rex took 3 full steps backward, calculating. If he called 911 from anywhere nearby, which he could not because he had no phone, the police would come, and then they would see him and they would run his name and find the report on the runaway from Barstow, and he would be in a county vehicle before the ambulance even arrived. And if the biker survived, and if the club found out a street kid had been present at the scene, the geometry of that did not resolve into anything he wanted to be in the middle of. He turned. He started walking east. He took 3 steps. Then she screamed. It was not a cry for help in any conventional sense. There was no pleas in it, no appeal to mercy or shared humanity. It was the sound an animal makes in a leg hold trap when it understands the trap completely. Pure physical terror, unmediated by language or dignity. It bypassed every rational calculation Rex had constructed over the last 60 seconds and hit something deeper. Something older, something that had not been fully extinguished by 3 years in the system. He stopped. He stood with his back to the burning car, eyes closed, jaw-locked, fists balled at his sides. He thought about Barstow, about Garland's forearm, about the smell of that house, about the caseworker who had looked at him during their last meeting with the particular expression that meant she had already stopped seeing him as an individual case and started seeing him as a caseload statistic. He thought about what it felt like to need someone to turn around and not have anyone turn around. He cursed under his breath, a word he only used when the situation genuinely demanded it. He dropped his backpack in the dirt and sprinted back. The heat at close range was another order of magnitude. He could feel it on the skin of his forearms and face even before he reached the edge of the ditch, a dry baking pressure like leaning into an open kiln. The smell of gasoline was intense and low, hugging the ground. A thin blue ribbon of flame had appeared along the edge of the pooled fuel where it met the dry grass, delicate and almost pretty, for exactly the 2 seconds before it found purchase and began to move in earnest. Rex dropped to his knees at the passenger window opening. The inside of the cabin was a wreckage of plastic and airbag material and broken glass. The entire interior geometry inverted the headliner. Now the floor and the dashboard, now a ceiling above the girl's hanging head. She had heard him land. Her eyes were open. They were gray-green, he saw, and currently dilated wide with shock, the pupils enormous. She was looking at him with an expression that had stripped away everything social, all the performance of toughness that the leather vest implied, and was just animal urgency. "The belt," she said. Her voice was wrecked from the scream and from whatever had happened to her throat during the rolls. "It won't release. I've been trying." Rex could see the issue. The inertia reel mechanism was jammed, probably from deformation during the crash. The buckle itself was intact, but the release button was pressing against a piece of crushed door trim that had collapsed inward and was physically blocking the click. "I can't reach the buckle," Rex told her. "The clearance is wrong from outside." "Then cut it." "I don't have anything to cut with." The fire was no longer a ribbon. It had found the main fuel pool now and was moving across the surface with a low rushing sound, a sound like something breathing for the first time. The light it threw was orange and mobile, casting shifting shadows inside the cabin that made everything harder to read. Rex was already moving. He came up out of the ditch in a scramble, boots slipping on the loose soil, and swept the surrounding ground with his eyes. Chrome trim pieces from the car were scattered across the ditch floor and the surrounding desert. He went for the nearest one, a strip of metal that had sheared off the rear bumper, maybe 16 inches long, the broken end where it had separated from the car, ragged and irregular. He picked it up. The broken edge caught the light. It was not sharp the way a knife was sharp. It was jagged, serrated by the way metal tears rather than cuts. But the edge of it, where the chrome plating had flaked away from the steel, was aggressive enough to grip. He ran his thumb across it and felt it bite. He went back to the window. The heat inside the cabin was noticeably worse than it had been 30 seconds ago. The fire had reached the firewall and was working on the rubber seals and insulation around it. Thin gray smoke was beginning to find its way into the passenger compartment, the leading edge of what would become rapidly unbreathable in another 2 minutes. Rex leaned through the window. The posture required him to put his torso inside the car, his hips against the window frame, his feet still outside on the ditch bank. The metal of the frame was hot against his hip through the denim of his jeans. He ignored it. He reached across her suspended body. The leather of her vest was warm from the heat. He got the piece of chrome trim positioned against the seatbelt strap near the jammed buckle where the nylon was pulled taut by her body weight. He sawed. The first several strokes did almost nothing. The chrome edge was chewing at the nylon surface, fraying it, but the structural core of the belt was woven tight, and the jagged metal was a poor instrument. He adjusted his angle, found a micro edge on the broken end that was slightly more aggressive, and pressed harder. His hand was slipping. He looked down. His palm was bleeding from where the trim had cut him when he grabbed it, not a deep cut, but wide enough, and in a location where the motion of sawing kept opening it. His blood was mixing with the gray dust on the trim piece and smearing across the nylon of the seatbelt and across the girl's leather vest. He kept sawing. "Faster," she said. She was not panicking exactly. Panic implies a loss of function. She was fully functional and fully terrified and fully focused, which was a different thing. She had her hands braced against the crushed headliner below her head, keeping her neck from bending at an angle that would hurt. She was thinking. She was managing her own situation even while suspended upside down with a fire approaching. Rex noted this without commenting on it. He sawed faster. The smoke was thickening. He could taste it now, not just smell it, a chemical bitterness that coated the back of his throat and made him want to gag. His eyes were watering from the combination of heat and particulate. He blinked hard, kept working. The nylon of the belt had frayed through perhaps a third of its width. He could see the individual fibers parting under the edge, slowly, too slowly. The fire had reached the firewall fully now. He could hear it there, a deep, irregular roar beneath the surface sounds of cracking plastic and the occasional sharp pop of something failing under heat expansion. "Grab the strap above you," Rex said. His voice came out rough, the smoke catching in his throat. "Both hands. When it goes, you're going to drop. You need to not land on your head." She moved her hands immediately without argument, gripping the seatbelt strap above the cut point, taking some of her body weight onto her arms. Rex repositioned, slightly got a better angle, and drove the serrated edge through the remaining two-thirds of the belt in a series of short, hard strokes that cost him most of the skin on his knuckles, where they dragged against the crushed center console. The belt separated. The sound it made was like canvas tearing. She dropped. She had braced for it and got her arms down in time to absorb most of the impact. But her right leg caught the steering column on the way down, and she hit the headliner with enough force to grunt hard, a short, compressed sound of real pain. "Move toward the window," Rex said. He was already repositioning, pulling himself back out of the opening and reaching in with both hands. "Now, I'll pull." She was moving. Her left arm reached the window frame, and she got her left shoulder through. Her head cleared. Her upper body was out. Then her hips caught on something, the steering wheel, a piece of collapsed trim, he could not see what, and she stopped. "Stuck," she said. The word was flat and controlled and terrifying. "Stop moving," Rex said. He changed his grip, getting his hands onto the waistband of her jeans rather than the leather of her vest, and he planted his feet against the exterior of the car for leverage. The metal was hot enough through the soles of his shoes that he could feel it. He registered this and chose to continue. "When I pull," he said, "you push with whatever you have." "Go," she said. He threw every pound of his 130 pounds into it. His spine arched. His shoulders screamed. He felt the moment the obstruction gave way, felt the sudden lurch of her body coming free all at once, and then they were both falling backward, landing in the ditch in a tangle that put her largely on top of him and drove most of the air out of his chest. They lay there for a moment. Rex's vision was gray at the edges. He could not breathe, and then he could, a little shallow and ragged. The girl was moving off him, pushing herself sideways in the dirt. He heard her make a sound when her right leg came down and took weight, a short, hard sound through clenched teeth. He sat up. He looked at the car. The Mustang was no longer producing isolated flames. It was burning completely, a sustained roar of orange and black, the metal of the chassis glowing cherry red at the structural points where the heat was concentrating. The windows that remained intact had long since gone opaque with heat stress and smoke. "Move," Rex said. "We need to move back." She was trying. He could see her working to stand, and the right leg was not cooperating, folding under her at the knee with a wet structural quality that told him the bone had been involved when she hit the steering column. He got under her left arm without being asked. They moved up the slope of the ditch together, awkward and lurching, her arm across his shoulders, his arm around her waist over the leather of the vest. The incline was steep, and the loose soil gave way underfoot, and they fell twice before they reached the asphalt shoulder. They were maybe 35 feet from the wreck when the fuel tank went. It was not cinematic. There was no pillar of fire shooting skyward, no mushroom cloud, no pressure wave that flattened everything in a radius. What there was a concussive atmospheric thump, a sudden massive compression of air that Rex felt in his ears and chest, simultaneously followed immediately by a dense column of black, oily smoke shooting upward from the wreck. The radiant heat that washed over them was extraordinary. Rex felt his eyelashes singe. He shielded his face with his arm and felt the heat on the back of his hand. Then it was just the burning, just the car sitting in the ditch and burning and the smoke going up and the desert being very quiet around it. Rex sat down on the highway shoulder. He had not planned to sit. His legs made the decision independently. The girl sat beside him. Her right leg extended, her hands in the dirt behind her for support. She was breathing through her nose. The exhale controlled the kind of breathing someone does when they are managing pain actively rather than suffering it passively. She had not cried, not once. Rex looked at his hands. They were shaking. This surprised him slightly because he had not felt afraid during any of what had just happened, or at least he had not been aware of feeling afraid. But the hands were shaking anyway, fine rapid tremors that he could not stop by willing them to stop. He looked at the chrome trim piece he had set down in the dirt when they fell. The broken end was dark with the mixture of his blood and her blood and the soot from inside the cabin. He looked at the burning car. He looked at where the window had been, at the geometry of how close the fire was to the trapped cabin when they cleared it, at the simple arithmetic of time that the calculation implied. He had not run. He turned this over in his mind without pride or congratulation. It was simply a fact about himself that he had not previously known with certainty. He had thought in the abstract that if something like this happened, he would probably run. Most people would. He had run from easier things. The fact that he had not run from this one did not feel like heroism. It felt like finding out a thing you did not know about the structure of who you were. The girl spoke. "Maggie," she said. Her voice was still rough, abraded by smoke. "My name is Maggie." She said it not like an introduction, but like a statement of facts she needed to put on the record. "Rex," he said. She nodded once. She looked at the burning car. She looked at the expanse of desert highway stretching empty in both directions. She was thinking about something complex, and he could not read what it was. "Your hands are bad," she said. Rex looked down. The cut across his palm had continued bleeding slower now, but the hand was dark with it. His knuckles were raw and oozing where the skin had come off on the console. "It's okay," he said. "It's not," she said, "but thank you." They sat. Rex was the one who heard it first. The sensation came through the soles of his feet before it became audible, a low-frequency vibration in the asphalt that had a specific rhythmic character. He knew that rhythm before his conscious mind processed what it meant. He had heard it at a distance from the Barstow Group Homes parking lot on summer evenings. The sound of large displacement engines running together at highway speed. Motorcycles, many of them. He was on his feet before he had decided to stand. His instincts ran the calculation instantaneously. He was a runaway juvenile with a warrant sitting next to a woman in a biker vest on a California state highway with a burning vehicle 30 feet away. That was his situation. The question was not whether to move, but whether moving would actually help, and the answer to that was not if the bikes were close enough. He turned his head east along the highway and saw the dust cloud, first a long horizontal smear of it rising from the road surface, the kind of signature a large formation makes at high speed. Then as the formation crested a shallow rise in the terrain about a mile out, he saw the leading edge of it. The front rank of the formation caught the afternoon sun on their chrome and threw it back. The formation was wide, 2 bikes to a column filling both lanes, and it stretched back along the highway, farther than Rex could track. The sound, which had been a vibration felt through his feet a moment ago, was now fully audible, a wall of engine noise, deep and layered and continuous. Rex looked at Maggie. She had heard it too. She was trying to push herself upright, her face tight with the effort, her right leg still unable to bear load. She looked at Rex. Rex looked at the desert to the south of the highway. The terrain was open scrubland, sage and creosote and scattered rock. An exposed sprint in that direction would be visible for half a mile. He looked north. The cutbank of the drainage ditch. Possible concealment if he moved immediately and the approaching riders were not already watching the shoulder. He was calculating the distance and the time. Maggie reached out and caught his wrist. Her grip was surprisingly strong for someone with a broken leg and blood on her face. She did not squeeze. She just held. And she looked at him with those gray-green eyes and said in a voice that carried no manipulation and no plea, just a simple, flat statement of truth. "They will find you. If you run, they will find you, and it will be worse. Stay." Rex looked at her hand on his wrist. He looked at the formation now close enough that he could begin to resolve individual riders from the mass of chrome and black leather. The lead bike was pulling ahead of the formation slightly as it decelerated, a big stripped-down machine running no fairings, all frame and engine and attitude. He sat back down in the dirt. He did not consciously decide to trust her advice. He had simply run out of better options, and she had caught his wrist, and there was something in the way she said stay. That was not a trick and not a trap and not a promise of safety either. It was just a person telling him the practical truth about his situation. The formation arrived. The lead bike stopped in the westbound lane, and the formation began to spread out around the burning wreck in a practiced maneuver that spoke of people who had performed this kind of impromptu road control before. Bikes stopped. Engines killed in sequence, the deep mechanical roar decrescendoing to a rattling idle, and then to silence as the last ones came to rest. Boots hit the pavement in a long, rolling percussion, dozens of men dismounting in sequence. Rex sat in the dirt on the highway's shoulder and did not move. The man who came off the lead bike last had been standing still, while it stopped, one boot on the ground, one still on the peg, studying the scene before he committed to full dismount. This was someone who read situations before entering them. He came down from the bike slowly with the deliberate economy of a very large man who had learned not to waste movement. He was enormous. Rex had known large men before in the group homes and the county facilities, men whose size was a working tool they carried and deployed. This man was different. His size was not performative. It was just structural, the chassis of him wide through the shoulders and deep through the chest, and moving with a kind of settled gravity that had nothing to do with aggression. His hair was dark gray, cropped short, and his beard was full, and the same dark gray shot through with silver. He was wearing a leather cut over a dark flannel, and the patches on the cut put him as a Carrion Riders officer. President Patch. His name was stitched in red thread above the left breast pocket. Diesel. He crossed from the bike to the scene in 8 long strides, and in those 8 strides his eyes did not stop moving. He took in the burning car. He took in the skid marks on the highway. He took in the drag marks in the ditch. He took in Maggie. He stopped. For a man of his size and apparent composure, the sound that came out of him was surprisingly small. It was barely a sound at all. It was the inhale of someone who has been hit somewhere internal. Maggie. He covered the remaining distance at a pace that was not quite running, but was close, dropping to one knee in the dirt beside her with a controlled collapse, his huge hands moving over her face and shoulders in an inventory, not touching, but hovering, cataloging. He pulled off his sunglasses and his eyes were blue, a pale, washed-out blue that was exactly the same shade as Maggie's eyes, and they were wide and bloodshot and not performing anything. "Dad," Maggie said. Her voice had the softness of someone who had been holding something rigid for a long time and could finally let it go slightly. "I wrecked the Mustang." "I don't care about the Mustang," Diesel said. The words came out thick, like they had to be pushed. He looked at her leg extended in the dirt and did not touch it. "Where else?" "Right leg is broken. Head is cut, but I can think straight. Ribs are sore, but I can breathe." "Van is 3 minutes back," Diesel said. "Doc is in it." He looked up, in a way a sharp motion, scanning the scene with the same methodical intelligence he had brought to everything else. His gaze moved across the drag marks in the ditch, moved to the shattered passenger window frame, moved to the chrome trim piece lying in the dirt with its dark coating of dried blood, moved to Rex. Rex was sitting 4 feet away in the dirt on the highway's shoulder knees, pulled up, arms loose at his sides. He was not trying to look harmless. He was too tired to try to look like anything. He met Diesel's eyes. The calculation in those eyes was rapid and complete. Rex watched it happen. Watched the older man's gaze move across him the way it had moved across the physical scene, taking inventory, reading the geometry of what had happened from the evidence the scene offered. The melted soles of Rex's shoes, the cut across his palm wrapped in a strip of cloth torn from his shirt, the ash on his forearms, the blood that was partially his and partially Maggie's. Then Diesel looked back. And Diesel looked back at Maggie. Something unspoken passed between them. Question and answer, in a look the shorthand of 2 people who knew each other completely. Diesel looked back at Rex. A man came up behind Diesel, shorter and angular, with a scar bisecting his left ear, moving with the specific body language of someone who is used to being the second person in the room. The VP patch on his vest read Axel. He put a hand briefly on Diesel's shoulder and leaned down to look at Maggie and then straightened and looked at Rex with an expression that was calculating and not friendly. "Who's the kid?" Axel said. Diesel raised a hand, not a dismissal, a pause. He was still looking at Rex. "What's your name?" Diesel said. It was not quite a question. It was more like the opening of a formal process. Rex looked at him. He thought about lying. He had a few aliases prepared, names he had used in various county contexts when the real name felt too visible. But something about the way Diesel was looking at him made the lie feel both necessary and useless, simultaneously necessary, because his real name carried a warrant, and useless because this man would see through whatever Rex said the same way he had read the scene. "Rex," he said, "just the first name, a compromise." Diesel nodded slowly. He was still running the calculation. Rex could feel it. Behind Diesel, the other members of the club had organized themselves with a practiced efficiency that spoke of men who knew how to occupy a space collectively. Several were positioned on the highway in both directions, serving as impromptu traffic control. Others had approached the burning car and were studying the wreck from a safe perimeter. Two were coming down the shoulder from the east with a large plastic container of water and a first aid bag. The van arrived. It came from the east, having apparently been behind the main formation, and it pulled onto the shoulder with its hazard lights running. Two men came out of the back before it had fully stopped, moving fast with the specific urgency of people who have medical training and know how to prioritize. They went directly to Maggie. Rex watched them work quickly and without waste, one man stabilizing her neck while the other ran his hands along her right leg with a professional precision. They spoke to each other in the clipped shorthand of training. Diesel had not moved. He was still looking at Rex. "Where did you come from?" Diesel said. Rex pointed west along the highway. "Walking." "From where?" "Barstow." "You've been out here all day." "Since morning," Rex said. Diesel glanced at Rex's backpack sitting in the dirt a few feet away, where Rex had dropped it when he sprinted back to the car. The pack was old, and the straps were frayed, and it was not large. The inventory it suggested was obvious. "How old are you?" Diesel said. Rex considered the range of answers. He settled on the truth partly because he was tired, and partly because the truth was difficult enough to be interesting. 15, he said. Diesel looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at the burning Mustang still roaring in the ditch, black smoke stacking up against the desert sky. He looked at the window frame. He looked at the drag marks. He looked at the chrome trim piece lying in the dirt. He was doing the reconstruction. Rex watched him do it. Watched the older man build the sequence from the physical evidence the way an investigator would, the marks in the dirt telling the story of what had happened inside the car and how it had ended and what the timeline had been. When Diesel turned back to look at Rex again, something had changed in his expression. It was not soft exactly. Nothing about this man went soft, but the calculation in his eyes had arrived somewhere, and what was there now was not the initial neutrality. It was something Rex had no word for because he had no prior experience with it. Behind Diesel, Axel was looking at Rex with a different expression, entirely narrower and more probing. He was building his own reconstruction. He leaned close to Diesel and said something low that Rex could not hear. Diesel's response was to turn to look at Maggie. The medical men had her stabilize a temporary splint on the right leg, a bandage across the gash at her hairline. Her color was still poor, but she was fully conscious and tracking. She had been watching the exchange between her father and Rex with an attention that suggested she was making sure it went a particular direction. She caught Diesel's look. She held it. "He pulled me out," she said. It was not loud. It did not need to be. The belt was jammed. The fire was there. He cut the belt and he pulled me out through the window. She paused to breathe, slowly managing the rib pain. It blew up maybe 20 seconds after we cleared it. Silence. The desert was very quiet under the column of black smoke. Diesel looked at the burn marks on Rex's forearms, at the melted rubber of his shoes, at the dried blood on the piece of chrome trim in the dirt. He looked at his daughter. He looked at the burning wreck. He looked at the drag marks in the ditch leading from the driver's window to the highway shoulder. And then something happened that Rex would spend years trying to explain and never fully succeed. Diesel Holden, president of the Carrion Riders MC California chapter. A man who had spent 30 years operating in spaces where weakness was a liability and sentiment was a danger, looked at the scrawny, blood-covered 15-year-old sitting in the dirt on the shoulder of a California highway, and his legs gave out. Not from injury, not from illness, From the weight of a specific knowledge that had arrived all at once, in the space of a breath, the knowledge of what the scene in front of him meant, what had almost happened, what had not happened, and why. He went down to both knees in the dirt in front of Rex, the heavy thud of it audible over the crackle of the burning car, and he did not look diminished by it. He looked like a man whose body had simply responded honestly to the truth of the moment. Rex sat very still. He had braced for many things in his life. He had braced for hits, for doors closing, for names coming back wrong, in systems for the particular tone in which adults told him what was going to happen to him next without asking. He had not prepared for this. Diesel's hands, large and calloused and covered in the accumulated ink of 30 years of decisions, came up and wrapped gently around Rex's wrists, around the cut palm and the scraped knuckles, holding them with a care that was completely at odds with the physical architecture of the man. "My whole world was in that car," Diesel said. His voice was rough in a different way than it had been. "My entire world." He bowed his head. Rex sat in the dirt on the burning highway and did not know what to do with any of this, so he did nothing. Behind Diesel, Axel had gone still. The two medical men had paused in their work. Several members standing nearby had turned. Axel looked at the scene for a moment. He looked at Diesel. He looked at Rex. He looked at the burning car and the drag marks and the chrome trim in the dirt. Then Axel dropped to one knee. It was not a theatrical gesture. It was the same physical honesty that had taken Diesel down, the same acknowledgement of a weight that the body could not hold upright. The scarred VP of the Carrion Riders went down to one knee in the highway dirt and did not say anything. The man with the sergeant-at-arms patch, whom Rex would later learn was called Colt, a broad man with deep-set eyes and hands like tooled leather, watched Axel go down. He looked at Rex. He looked at Diesel. He looked at Maggie, who was watching from the dirt with her jaw set and her eyes very bright. Colt went to one knee. The movement carried down the line. Not quickly, not in a rush. Deliberately, one by one, the members of the Carrion Riders, who were close enough to have registered what was happening, went to one knee on the highway shoulder and on the asphalt itself. The sound of it was the sound of boots and denim and the creak of leather, a long, staggered sequence of bodies acknowledging something. Rex looked at the line of men. 89 members of a motorcycle club kneeling on a California state highway in the late afternoon sun because a 15-year-old runaway with a torn backpack and dissolving shoes had not run when the fire started. Rex's stomach growled. It was loud, involuntary, genuinely ill-timed. Diesel looked up. His eyes were wet at the outer corners, just at the corners, the minimum possible acknowledgement of emotion consistent with the structure of the man. He looked at Rex's face, at the hollows under his cheekbones, at the pallor that came from 9 hours without food in desert heat. He made a sound that was not crying and was not laughing, but was something in the vicinity of both a wet, compressed sound from deep in the chest and something in his expression broke open slightly and became something Rex did not have a word for. "When did you last eat?" Diesel said. Rex thought about the saltine crackers, about the gas station in Barstow, about the arithmetic of hours. "Yesterday," he said, "kind of." Diesel nodded. He stood slowly with the deliberate movements of a large man managing the mechanics of his own body. He stood to his full height and he looked down at Rex in the dirt and he reached out, one hand open, palm up. Rex looked at the hand. It was scarred across the knuckles and tattooed from the wrist to the sleeve line, and it was not a hand that had spent its life in gentle pursuits. It was also not shaking. Rex took it. Diesel pulled him to his feet with an ease that suggested Rex's weight was not a variable he needed to account for. They stood on the highway's shoulder, the burning car behind them, the kneeling column of men to their right, the desert stretching away in all directions under the low afternoon sun. "You're eating tonight," Diesel said, "and tomorrow, and every day after that for as long as you want." Rex stood on his melted shoes and looked at the hand still holding his. For the first time in 3 years, the particular burning reflex in his chest that said run said nothing at all. The desert around them was doing what deserts do in the late afternoon. It was deepening. The shadows that had been nearly absent at midday were now long and directional, stretching east from every rock and shrub and person standing on the highway shoulder. The sky above was shifting from its midday white blue towards something richer. The first intimations of color that would not fully arrive for another hour, but were already suggesting themselves at the horizon edges. Rex stood and felt the change in the air, and did not name it as beauty, because he was not in the habit of naming things like that. He noticed it the way you notice a change in temperature as information. Around him, the members of the Carrion Riders were rising from their knees in the same deliberate sequence, in which they had gone down the movement rippling from front to back, the way a field of grass moves when a wind passes over it. Men dusted off their jeans and straightened their vests and went back to the functional tasks of the scene, checking on Maggie, managing the road, waiting on the arrival of what would eventually be police and fire response from the nearest jurisdiction. Rex watched them. He was trying to understand the social grammar of what he was seeing. He had lived inside institutions for 3 years, and he knew how groups of men organized themselves in conditions of stress. He knew the body language of dominance hierarchies, the deference cues, the small territorial performances that kept men sorted and in their understood positions relative to one another. He recognized those things here. They were present, but they were present in the background, in the fine texture of how men stood near each other, in which direction they faced, and whose movements others tracked. What was in the foreground was something different, a kind of coherence. These men knew each other in the way that people who have been in real situations together know each other. Not the performed familiarity of institutions, but the deeper knowledge of people who have relied on each other when the reliance was not hypothetical. Rex had never been inside that. He had been managed by institutions, processed by systems placed in proximity to other human beings, by mechanisms that had nothing to do with choice or trust. He had survived in those conditions by remaining portable, attaching to nothing, keeping his internal map of exits updated at all times. He was aware in the precise and unsentimental way, he was aware of most things, that what was happening right now was the most dangerous thing that had happened to him today. More dangerous than the fire, more dangerous than the approaching bikers, more dangerous than the burning car or the jammed seatbelt or the gasoline pooling toward the flame. The most dangerous thing was that some part of him did not want to run. He looked at Diesel, who was standing a few feet away, in low conversation with Axel, gesturing toward the van, where Maggie was being more fully assessed by the man they called Doc. The conversation was short and functional, and when it ended, Axel moved off toward the van, and Diesel turned back toward Rex. He crossed the few feet of highway shoulder between them and stood in front of Rex with his hands easy at his sides. In proximity, the sheer physical fact of the man was more apparent. He was 6 feet 3 or 4, and the width of him was not the soft width of a large man who had been sedentary, but the dense width of someone who had kept himself physically functional across a lifetime that had required it. His face was mapped with the specific kind of lines that came from decades of outdoor exposure, deep creases at the outer corners of the eyes, a permanent weathering of the skin across the cheekbones and forehead. He was looking at Rex with an expression that Rex had not seen on an adult face directed at him before and could not immediately categorize. "Where are you headed?" Diesel said. Rex looked east along the highway. The mirage was back at the horizon, the road shimmering and dissolving into the heat haze. "Wherever," he said. Diesel absorbed this. He did not react to it with the particular adult response Rex was accustomed to, the narrowing of eyes, the shift into management mode, the production of options and structures and interventions. He just looked east along the highway, the same direction Rex was looking, as if taking in the view. "That's a hard way to travel," he said. "It's the way I know," Rex said. Diesel looked at him. "You know another way now," he said, and he was not talking about the interstate highway system. Rex said nothing. He looked at Maggie in the van, visible through the open side door, sitting up now, with a temporary splint, immobilizing her right leg, talking to Doc in the animated, abbreviated way of someone giving a medical history. She caught Rex's gaze through the door. She gave him a short nod, the particular nod of two people who have shared something that most people do not share and do not need to discuss. Rex looked back at Diesel. The older man was still watching him with that expression Rex could not name. Rex would carry it for a long time before he found the word for it years later in a context he could not have imagined from this highway's shoulder. The word he would eventually find was regard. Not pity, not assessment, not the institutional evaluation of a case file. Just regard, the simple attention of one person to another absent of agenda. He had not known what it felt like until he felt it. The burning Mustang was settling now, the initial fierce roar of the fire diminishing, as the fuel exhausted itself, collapsing inward as the structural metal gave way to the sustained heat. The smoke column was thinning slightly, the dense black of burning hydrocarbons, shading toward a grayer, less toxic smoke as the combustibles reduced. In the distance, faint and still growing, Rex heard sirens. Highway patrol, probably. They would arrive and there would be questions, and he would need to navigate whatever came next with the specific skill set. He had the ability to manage institutions, to tell partial truths effectively, to keep himself from being immediately returned to a system he had just walked away from for the fourth time. He was aware of all of this. He was also aware that Diesel was still standing next to him and had not moved and was not going to move until Rex moved first. Rex looked at his own hands. The cut across his palm had clotted the dried blood dark and tight. His knuckles were scabbing over. His forearms were reddened from the heat exposure, not burned, but the kind of deep flushed color that would be sore by tomorrow. He thought about the 9 miles to the truck stop in Ludlow. He thought about the water he did not have. He thought about the crackers he had stolen and eaten and the hours between then and now. He thought about the highway stretching east into the basin and range country beyond the Mojave, the distances between anything and anything else, the arithmetic of what it meant to be 15 years old and walking. He looked up at Diesel. "What's the state going to cost me?" Rex said. It was a genuine question. He had learned never to assume something was free. Free had a cost that was usually higher than the stated price. Diesel's expression did not change. He looked at Rex for a moment, and then he said very simply, "Nothing, it costs nothing." Rex held this. He turned it over. He looked for the mechanism, the transaction underneath the gift, the thing that would be asked for later. He could not find it. He was 15, and he was very good at finding it, and he could not find it. "Okay," Rex said. He picked up his backpack. He shouldered it. He stood on the highway in his melted shoes with his scraped hands and his smoke-roughened throat and his hollow stomach, and for the first time in 3 years, the word okay meant something roughly like what it was supposed to mean. The highway patrol arrived 22 minutes after the tank blew. 2 cruisers' lights running came in from the east and one from the west, and they slowed when they encountered the perimeter of parked motorcycles that extended a quarter mile in both directions from the burning wreck. Rex watched the officers get out of their vehicles with the studied caution of men who had processed the situation from a distance and were arriving with a set of assumptions that the actual scene was going to require them to revise. There were 89 Carrion Riders on that stretch of highway. The officers were 3. The lead officer, a rangy man in his 40s with the particular bearing of someone who had done this long enough to have stopped being dramatic about it, walked the perimeter of the scene before approaching anyone. He studied the skid marks. He studied the path of the crash into the ditch. He studied the burn site. He looked at the drag marks. He noted the 2 parallel trenches in the ditch soil that led from the driver's window to the highway shoulder. Then he came over to where Diesel was standing with Rex and 2 other senior members of the club. He looked at Diesel. He looked at Rex. He made a visible adjustment in his initial interpretation of the scene. "Mr. Holden," the officer said. He knew the name. His voice carried neither warmth nor hostility. The professional neutral of someone who had history with a specific situation and had made peace with the fact that the history was complicated. "Officer Delaney," Diesel said with the same professional neutral. "Your daughter, in the van, broken leg, head, lacked possible rib involvement. Doc assessed her before you arrived." Delaney looked toward the van, looked at Rex. "And this? He's with us," Diesel said. Delaney looked at Rex in the particular way that highway patrol officers look at juveniles found at accident scenes on state highways. Rex looked back at him with the specific expression he had developed over 3 years for exactly this kind of encounter. Not defiant, not cowering. Neutral, cooperative, giving the officer nothing to grab onto while also providing no resistance. "Son," Delaney said, "can I see some ID?" "I don't have any," Rex said. This was true. "Name me?" "Rex Hendricks." Delaney had a pad and he wrote it down. Rex watched him write it and calculated the outcome. The name would go into the system. The system would return the runaway flag from Barstow within minutes, and then the calculation would shift. He was already thinking about how that conversation would go when Diesel spoke. "He pulled my daughter out of that car," Diesel said. He said it quietly and without inflection, but with a weight that Delaney registered visibly. The seatbelt was jammed and the fuel was burning, and she was hanging upside down when this kid walked into that. He gestured toward the burned-out Mustang with one hand. He went in with a piece of bumper trim and cut the belt and dragged her out through the window. 30 seconds before the tank went, Delaney looked at Rex. He looked at Rex's hands. He looked at his shoes. He looked at the burned discoloration on his forearms. He looked at the piece of chrome trim that was still lying in the dirt where Rex had set it down now identified as the instrument of what had happened. He wrote something on his pad. "Are you a resident of Barstow?" Delaney said. "I was," Rex said. Delaney looked at him for another moment. He looked at Diesel. He made a decision that was visible in the set of his jaw, the particular kind of decision that experienced officers make when the arithmetic of a situation produces a result that the letter of the law and the spirit of the situation point in different directions. "I'm going to need your contact information," Delaney said to Diesel, "for the report." "You have it," Diesel said. "I'm going to need the boy to stay available for follow-up questions." "He'll be available," Diesel said. Delaney clicked his pen. He did not run Rex's name on the radio. He wrote what he wrote on his pad, and he moved on to the next part of the scene, and Rex watched him go and understood that something had just happened that he did not have full visibility into, but that was working in his favor. He looked at Diesel. Diesel was looking at Delaney's retreating back. His expression was the expression of a man confirming that a calculation he had made was correct. He looked at Rex. "Come on," he said, "and let's get you cleaned up." The van that served as the club's road support was fitted out in the back with the practical efficiency of a space designed for actual use rather than appearance. There was a cabinet of medical supplies that Doc, whose real name was Warren, and who had done 2 years of paramedic training before departing that career for reasons he did not discuss, had organized with the precision of someone who had used it under conditions where organization mattered. There was a cooler of water and sports drinks. There were folded blankets. There was a box of clothing, mixed sizes and states of wear, the kind of reserve that a group traveling long distances on motorcycles maintained against the inevitable. Doc cleaned and bandaged Rex's hands with the brisk competence of someone for whom this was familiar. The cut across the palm was the most significant. It ran from below the index finger to the heel of the palm about 3 inches, not deep enough to require stitches, but deep enough to require the series of steri strips Doc applied with a tight, even spacing. "You feel that," Doc said, pressing a gauze pad to the center of the cut and watching Rex's expression. "Yes," Rex said. "Good. That means the nerves aren't compromised." He pressed harder, and Rex felt the specific burn of the pressure against freshly abraded tissue. He kept his face still. Doc noticed him keeping it still, and his expression shifted slightly, a professional observation of a behavioral data point. "You've been in hospitals much," he said. "Some," Rex said. Doc did not ask what that meant. He finished the dressing and moved on to the knuckles, which required less sophisticated treatment, and when he was done, he looked at Rex's forearms with the UV lamp from his bag, checking for depth on the heat exposure. "You'll be sore tomorrow," Doc said, "but you didn't get deep tissue. Drink this." He handed Rex a bottle of something blue and electrolytic. Rex drank it. The sweetness of it hit his empty stomach immediately and made his hands shake for reasons that had nothing to do with emotion. "When did you last eat?" Doc said. "Yesterday." Doc looked at him over the bottle. He reached into the side pocket of his medical bag and produced a sealed protein bar, the dense utilitarian kind, and set it on the bench beside Rex without ceremony. Rex picked it up and ate it in 4 bites. Doc watched this and then produced a second one without comment. Maggie was on the bench at the rear of the van, her right leg immobilized and elevated on a rolled blanket. She had a bandage across her hairline, and she looked pale but animated, her color improving from the initial ash white of shock. She had been watching Rex since he got into the van. "How long were you walking?" she said. "Since before dawn," Rex said. "From Barstow." "From east of it." She looked at his shoes, or what remained of them, the rubber soles now fused into distorted shapes where they had pressed against the hot metal exterior of the Mustang. "Those are destroyed," she said. "They were almost destroyed before," Rex said. She almost smiled. It was not a warm expression. It was the expression of someone who appreciated a specific kind of honesty. "Where are you going?" Rex ate the second protein bar. "I was thinking Needles, maybe Kingman after that." "Why?" "No reason for Kingman," he admitted. "It's just east." Maggie looked at him for a moment. She looked at the bandage on his hand and then at the window of the van where the burning wreck was visible in the distance, the smoke column thin and gray now in the late afternoon light. "You almost didn't come back," she said. It was not an accusation. It was an observation delivered without judgment, the same quality of honest observation she had used when she said stay. Rex looked at her. "Yes," he said. "What made you come back?" He thought about this. He had been thinking about it since it happened, in the spaces between the physical urgency of the situation and the subsequent arrivals. He had turned over several answers, the most convenient ones, first the ones that put a clean narrative frame on the decision. None of them were quite true. "I don't know," he said finally, which was the most accurate thing he could say. He did not know what had pulled him back when the scream hit. He only knew that it had, and that he had not run, and that both of those things seemed to say something about the structure of who he was that he had not previously had data on. Maggie looked at him. Whatever she saw in his face when he said that, it appeared to satisfy her more than the convenient version would have. "That's the honest answer," she said. "I don't have a dishonest one ready," he said. She did almost smile again. "You'll fit in here," she said. They did not make it to wherever they had been going. The destination, Rex learned gradually and in pieces over the following hours, was a multi-day gathering of Carrion Riders chapters at a private property outside of Needles, an annual event that served as a combination of business meeting and ceremony. Maggie had been driving ahead to handle logistics at the site. The accident had happened on the last 50 miles of her route. With Maggie injured, the gathering logistics needed to be rerouted. Axel handled the communications from the highway's shoulder, working his phone with the compressed efficiency of someone managing a complex operational change. And by the time the highway patrol had finished their scene documentation and the tow truck had arrived to begin the process of extracting the burned Mustang from the ditch, the destination had been changed. The club was going to its chapter house in Needles. The gathering would proceed modified. Rex learned this because Diesel told him directly. He came to the van door while Doc was doing a final check on Maggie's blood pressure, and he looked at Rex and said without preamble, "We're going to Needles, the clubhouse. You're coming." It was stated as a fact, not a question. Rex understood the social grammar of the statement well enough to know that it was also not a command. It was an opening dressed as a fact that left him a genuine out if he needed one. He looked east along the highway. Needles was roughly 80 miles ahead, and he had been planning to get there anyway by walking over the course of several days without food or water through some of the most unforgiving terrain in the American Southwest. The calculation was not difficult. "Okay," Rex said. He rode in the van beside Maggie while the club's 89 bikes formed up around them in a formation that made the van's forward progress feel like something being conducted rather than driven. He watched them through the rear windows, the long column of bikes running two abreast in the right lane, and he felt the strange, dreamlike quality of a situation that could not have been predicted by any prior map of how his life worked. Maggie slept for the first 40 miles. She did it the way people who are accustomed to sleeping in difficult conditions sleep, without transition, just present and then absent. Her breathing evened and deepened, and she was gone. Doc sat in the front passenger seat and was quiet. The driver was a man the others called Briggs, compact and gray-haired, who drove with both hands on the wheel and did not converse. Rex looked out the window at the desert, at the last light on the Joshua trees, at the deep blue that was beginning to replace the white of the sky at the zenith, at the stars that were appearing one at a time at the eastern edge of the sky, not visible yet, just implied the darkness between them deepening first. He had a thought that was not characteristic of him, a thought that belonged to a different kind of 15-year-old one with a different history. He thought, "I am here." Not here in the sense of a location, here in the sense of being present in a moment and not spending the moment calculating the next move. He was in the van, and the desert was outside the windows, and Maggie was asleep next to him, and the sound of 89 motorcycles was an ongoing low-frequency presence in the structure of the vehicle, and he was not thinking about anything that was not exactly this. He filed this away. He did not understand it yet. He kept it to look at later. The chapter house in Needles was a converted commercial property on the south edge of town, what had been a welding shop before the club acquired it 15 years earlier. The exterior was corrugated metal, painted dark gray, the parking area dirt and gravel surrounded by a chain-link perimeter fence with slats woven through for privacy. The front gate was wide enough for two bikes to pass through side by side. They arrived after dark. The gate opened from inside before the lead bike reached it, operated by someone who had been monitoring the approach. The bikes filed in, filling the area with a sound that the metal walls of the building amplified and concentrated. Rex got out of the van and stood in the lot and felt the vibration of the engines through the soles of his ruined shoes and watched 89 men secure their bikes with the synchronized efficiency of long practice. The interior of the building was large and warm, lit by industrial fixtures suspended from the high ceiling. Along one wall was a bar of considerable length, well-stocked, and operated by two men who had been there ahead of the group's arrival preparing. Along the opposite wall were booths with heavy wooden benches, their surfaces worn smooth by years of use. In the center of the space were several long tables that could be arranged for meetings or cleared for movement. There was a kitchen behind a pass-through window that was already producing smells that hit Rex's empty stomach with the force of something physical. Axel appeared at Rex's shoulder. He was the VP, shorter than Diesel and narrower, with the angular precision of a man who moved as if economy of motion was a personal value. He had said little directly to Rex since the highway, but Rex had been aware of him as an ongoing presence, watching, assessing, building, the kind of picture that a second-in-command builds about unknowns in the environment. "Kitchen's through that door," Axel said. He pointed. He did not offer further information. He did not offer warmth, but he pointed. Rex went through the door. The kitchen was narrow and functional, and the man working it was large and heavily tattooed and went by a name the others called Gordo, which was a name Rex understood well enough to appreciate the irony of given that the man was built like a load-bearing structural element rather than anything soft. He looked at Rex when Rex came through the door, and he looked at the bandage on Rex's hand and at his shoes, and he said without any introduction at all, "What do you want on your steak?" Rex stood in the kitchen doorway. "I don't care," he said. He meant it completely. He had not eaten a steak in 3 years, and the only criterion he had was that it existed. Gordo looked at him for a moment. He turned to the grill. "Sit there," he said, pointing at a stool near the pass-through, "and don't move." Rex sat. He ate steak and potatoes and bread and something green that he could not immediately identify but ate without objection, and then he ate the remaining steak because Gordo put the plate back in front of him without asking. He drank 2 glasses of water and one of something carbonated that Gordo produced from a small refrigerator under the counter. He did not speak during this. There was nothing to say, and he was focused entirely on the food with a concentration that was also a form of respect for the fact of it. When he finished the second plate, he sat for a moment. His hands had stopped shaking sometime during the first plate. The hollow space in his chest that the dehydration and the adrenaline and the 9 hours of walking had created was beginning to fill in around the edges. Gordo was cleaning the grill. He did it with the same methodical focus he brought to cooking. "Thank you," Rex said. Gordo looked over his shoulder. He nodded once and turned back to the grill. Diesel found him an hour later sitting in one of the booths along the far wall watching the room. Not monitoring for exits, though he was doing that too, by the habit of 3 years. Mostly just watching. The room had a texture. He was trying to read the relationships between men who had known each other a long time. The specific humor that existed between people with shared history, the way arguments got started and resolved without violence because the framework holding the group together was durable enough to absorb disagreement. He was studying this the way he had studied institutions his whole life, not to infiltrate them, but to survive in proximity to them. Diesel set a Coke on the table unopened and sat down across from Rex. He was not wearing his leather cut. Without it, the expanse of tattoos covering both arms was more visible, a full-color record of 3 decades of a particular kind of life. He had changed into a dark flannel shirt, and the fatigue of the day was more apparent without the armor of the vest. He looked at Rex for a moment without speaking. This was a quality Rex had noticed in him. He was comfortable in silence in a way that most adults were not. Most adults filled silence because silence felt like a power imbalance they needed to correct. Diesel used it differently. He seemed to regard it as a space in which truth could arrange itself without being crowded. "How long have you been running?" Diesel said. Rex looked at the Coke. 3 years, he said. "Since you were 12. 12 and a half, Rex said. The half felt important for reasons he could not have articulated. Diesel absorbed this. He did not perform sympathy. He did not make the sounds that adults made when they were processing difficult information about a child and wanted the child to know they were feeling appropriate feelings. He just sat with the information. "What happened at 12 and a half, he said. Rex looked at the surface of the table. It was worn wood, the grain of it raised slightly where the varnish had been rubbed away over years. He traced a line in the grain with one finger, not avoiding the question, just organizing what he wanted to say and what he didn't. "My mother died," he said. "There was no father on record. I went into the system." "How did she die?" It was a direct question. Rex looked up. Most adults did not ask that directly. They circled it. They offered an out before you even got to the answer. "Car accident," Rex said. "Mine." She hit a median on the 99. She'd been working a double shift and fell asleep. He paused. There was nothing dramatic about it. She was tired. She worked all the time. She fell asleep. Diesel nodded slowly. He looked at Rex with the same quality of regard that Rex had seen on the highway shoulder and still could not fully process. "And the four placements," he said. Rex looked up sharply. Diesel had done some version of a check on him. The realization was neither alarming nor surprising. Of course he had. He was the president of a motorcycle club. He had resources Rex could not inventory. He had made a calculation about Rex on the highway, and it was characteristic of him that he had then done the work to support the calculation rather than just accepting his first impression. "Four," Rex confirmed. "Fresno, Stockton, 2 in Barstow." "Yes." "The last one," Diesel said. He did not finish the sentence. He let it sit there waiting for whatever Rex chose to do with it. Rex was quiet for a moment. He had not told anyone about Garland, not because he was protecting the man, but because the reporting mechanism for that kind of thing had failed him before in ways that made the failure feel structural rather than incidental. You reported it, you got moved, you got someone else, and nothing in the underlying system changed. He had arrived at the practical conclusion that reporting had a cost and a limited benefit and had stopped doing it. The last one, Rex said, had a man named Garland in it. He said just that much. He let the sentence carry what it carried. Diesel was still. The stillness was not the stillness of someone restraining a reaction. It was the stillness of someone receiving information and deciding how to hold it. His eyes stayed on Rex's face the whole time. "Is that in Barstow?" he said. "South end of town," Rex said. "Off Barstow Road." Diesel nodded once. He did not say anything else about it. But Rex observed something shift in the quality of his stillness, a subtle change in the weight of what was present in his expression, something that had moved from information to intention without making a production of the transition. They sat. Rex opened the Coke. He drank some. The carbonation was sharp, and the sweetness hit immediately. "What happens now?" Rex said. He was not asking about the next hour. He was asking about the larger structure, the question that had been sitting in the background since the highway when Diesel had pulled him to his feet and made a statement about steak that could be read as an opening of something. Diesel looked at him. "What do you want to happen?" he said. Rex sat with the friend. It was not a question he had been asked in 3 years, or at least not in a register where the answer would be taken seriously. When institutions asked it, they were already in possession of an answer, and the question was a formality of process. The way Diesel asked it was different. It was the same flatness of genuine inquiry that Maggie had used on the highway, the simple, honest question, as opposed to the social performance of a question. Rex thought about it. He thought about the night he had left Barstow, the kitchen door closing behind him, the desert night cold and immense and empty. He thought about 3 years of moving through a landscape in which he was invisible by necessity and preference. He thought about the long list of things he had learned not to want, because wanting things that were not available was an additional form of loss he could not afford. He thought about what it had felt like when Diesel reached down and took his hand. "I don't know," Rex said. He said it without apology or deflection. "I haven't wanted things in a while. I'm not sure I remember how to start." Diesel looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, "Then you start by staying somewhere long enough to find out." Rex turned this over. "Where?" he said. Diesel put both hands flat on the table. "Here," he said, "with us, for as long as it makes sense." He paused. "We're not a government program. We're not a placement. We don't do paperwork. You stay because you want to stay, and you leave when you want to leave, and nobody holds you." He looked at Rex steadily. "But nobody pushes you out either." Rex looked at the hands on the table. He looked at the tattoos, the years of decisions embedded in the ink. He looked up at the face. "And Maggie," Rex said. "What about her? She's okay with this." Diesel made a sound that was not quite a laugh. "It was her idea," he said. Rex sat back. He looked at the room. The room was full of men he did not know, organized by a logic he was just beginning to be able to read, held together by something he did not yet have a word for. He looked at the bar and the long tables and the booths and the worn wood surfaces and the rows of bikes visible through the front windows. He looked back at Diesel. "There's a warrant," Rex said. "From Barstow. Runaway." Diesel nodded. "I know," he said. "That's a problem," Rex said. "We have a lawyer," Diesel said. "It's not as complicated as it sounds." Rex looked at him. "You're not worried about it." Diesel looked at him with what might have been in a lighter man something approaching amusement. "I've navigated more complex legal situations than a juvenile runaway flag," he said, "with less sympathetic facts on my side." Rex was quiet. "Okay," Rex said. He picked up his backpack. He shouldered it. The word okay meant something roughly like what it was supposed to mean, which was new. He woke once in the night, around 2 in the morning, by the quality of the silence, which was different from the silence of late evening in that it carried a specific completeness, the absence of even the residual sounds of people preparing to sleep. The building around him was quiet. A single light was visible under the door from the hallway. He lay on his back and looked at the ceiling and took an inventory of what had happened. He did this methodically the way he took inventory of every new environment. He cataloged the facts without editorializing. He had witnessed a car accident. He had made a decision to return to the burning vehicle. He had cut through a seatbelt and extracted a woman from a vehicle that was within seconds of their exit, a total loss. He had been brought to a building belonging to a motorcycle club. He had been given food and a place to sleep. He had agreed to stay provisionally without a defined timeline. The facts were clear. What they meant was less clear. He had been in buildings belonging to institutions his entire post-mother life. Institutions had rules that were legible even when the rules were bad ones. You understood where you stood inside an institution because the institution maintained constant visible pressure on you from all directions. You knew you were in a foster home because the county caseworker visited and the walls had rules posted in laminated sheets and the kitchen had a lock on the refrigerator. This was not an institution. The men here were not managing him. They were simply present in the same space, living by a structure he did not yet fully understand, organized by agreements he was not party to yet. The lack of legible pressure was unfamiliar. He kept looking for the lock on the refrigerator and not finding it. He was also aware that the absence of a legible system did not mean the absence of a system. Motorcycle clubs were not anarchic. They had their own structure, their own hierarchy, their own codes, which were all the more binding for being informal rather than written. He had picked up enough of the room's social grammar over the course of the evening to understand that Diesel's authority here was both absolute and contingent, the authority of someone who held a position by demonstrated capacity rather than by appointment. That was a different kind of power than the institutional authority he knew. It was harder to predict and probably harder to manage. He thought about the conversation in the booth. The question Diesel had asked him, "What do you want to happen?" He had given the honest answer that he did not know how to want things anymore. That had been true when he said it. But in the quiet of the small room with the sound of the desert outside the wall, he found that he was slightly more able to look at the question directly. He wanted to stop being invisible. That was the thing he most wanted that he had stopped allowing himself to want, because wanting it without having access to it was a specific form of pain he had learned to amputate by simply not admitting to the want. He wanted to be seen by people who were not going to move in somewhere else afterward. He looked at the ceiling. He thought about the 89 men going to one knee on the highway. He had been turning this over since it happened, and he kept arriving at the same thing, not the gesture itself, which he could not fully process emotionally, but the thing underneath it. The structure of a group that was capable of that gesture. The fact that the gesture was not performed for an audience but simply done because the situation demanded it, because the president had gone down and the others had followed, because that is what you do when the president goes down for a reason and the reason is valid. He had been the reason. A scrawny runaway kid with a piece of bumper chrome and a bad history, and he had been the reason 89 men went to their knees in the dirt. He was not going to pretend that did not matter to him. It mattered enormously. He had been invisible for 3 years, and the going to knee had been the inverse of invisible. It had been seen on a scale and with a sincerity that he had no prior reference for. He closed his eyes again. When he woke the second time, it was fully light, and the sounds through the wall were the sounds of morning. He sat up. He looked at the boots on the floor beside the cot. He picked one up and checked the size. It was close, maybe a half size large, but close. He put them on. They felt like boots rather than like ruins, a sensation so basic he had forgotten what it was like. He walked out to the main room. Axel was at the bar with a cup of coffee working his phone. He looked up when Rex came through. "Coffee's there," he said, pointing. Rex got a cup of coffee. He stood at the bar with it. Axel was watching him with the same narrow assessing quality he had maintained since the highway, the VP's evaluation of an unknown ongoing and not complete. "You sleep," Axel said. "Yes," Rex said. Axel nodded. He looked at Rex for a moment. "Diesel filled me in," he said. "Your situation." Rex looked at him. He waited. "I want to be straight with you," Axel said. Because straight is how we work. He set his phone face down on the bar. We get Diesel's debt. Every man in this building gets it. That's not going to change. He paused. But taking someone on is a different thing from owing someone a debt. You understand the difference? Yes, Rex said. Taking someone on has implications, Axel continued. For him, for the club, for you. It's not a transaction. It's a commitment that runs both ways. He looked at Rex directly. Nobody here is going to tell you what to want or who to be. But if you're going to be around, you're going to need to understand what it means to be around. Rex held his coffee. He looked at Axel and took the measure of the man as honestly as he could. The VP had a specific quality that was different from Diesel's quality. Diesel operated from a place that included a visible, emotional architecture, feelings that he did not display performatively, but that existed and influenced his decisions. Axel operated from something cooler, more structural, more purely rational. He was not unkind, but his calculation was visible, and it did not include the personal. I understand, Rex said. Axel looked at him. You're not what I expected, he said. Rex waited. I expected fear, Axel said. Most people have fear around us. Even people who don't show it have it. Rex thought about the highway, about sitting in the dirt while the formation arrived, about the calculation he had run, and the decision Maggie's hand on his wrist had influenced. I was scared, he said, on the highway. I know, Axel said. That's not what I mean. He looked at Rex for a moment. The fear is usually still there afterward, around us, even when we're not doing anything. People manage it differently, but it's there. He picked up his coffee. You don't have it. Rex thought about this. I've been in places that were scarier, he said. Axel looked at him with something that was the closest thing to surprise he had displayed. He studied Rex for a moment, and then he nodded once, a short, decisive nod, and he picked up his phone and went back to it. Rex stood at the bar and drank his coffee. Through the front windows, the lot was visible in the early morning light. The bikes were all there, their chrome catching the low-angle sun. Beyond the fence, the edge of the Mojave stretched south and east, the creosote and sage, and the far mountains barely visible in the morning haze. He thought about Ludlow and Kingman, and the highway stretching east into things he had not known. He thought about the map in his backpack, the torn page from the atlas showing the stretch between Barstow and Needles. He had made it to Needles. He had not arrived the way he expected. He turned from the window and went to find out what came next. Maggie was at the far end of the main room, installed on a bench with her right leg in a proper splint that the club's lawyer had apparently arranged a physician appearing at 6:30 in the morning without complaint. She had a cup of coffee and her phone, and she was working with the focused energy of someone who had been horizontal for 12 hours and was done with it. She looked up when Rex appeared. She gestured at the bench across from her. Rex sat. How's the leg, he said. 6 to 8 weeks, she said. Tibia fracture. Clean break, no displacement. I got lucky. She looked at him. We both got lucky. Rex looked at her. In the morning light, without the blood and the adrenaline and the smoke, he got a clearer picture of her. She was 19, dark-haired, with the pale blue eyes she had inherited directly from her father. Her face was angular and alert, and she moved with a kind of physical confidence that was not performed, just present, the confidence of someone who was used to occupying space without apology. The leather vest was hanging on a hook near the bench, freshly cleaned of the blood and ash. The patches on it were more legible now. A small patch above the center read Road Captain. You're Road Captain, Rex said. I was, she said. Starting next month, I was going to take the sergeant-at-arms position. She looked at the splint. Timelines adjusted. How long have you been in the club, he said. She looked at him with a slight expression. You mean how long have I been in my father's club? Yes, he said. She considered whether to be offended by the distinction and decided not to. Since I was 8 and went to my first run with him. Officially since I was 18 and earned it. She said the last part in a way that made clear the distinction mattered. Not the daughter of the president who got a patch as a courtesy, someone who had earned the right to wear it. Rex looked at the vest. What does earning it mean, Barney said, not challenging, genuinely curious. She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, it means you've demonstrated over time that you are someone the people around you can rely on. That you know the work and you do it. That when something needs to be done, you're the one doing it. She paused. And that when something goes wrong, you don't run. The last sentence landed between them with a specific weight. Rex looked at the vest. He looked at the patches. Yesterday, he said, when I had the trim piece and I was cutting through the belt, you said, please. He had been turning that over since it happened. You'd been saying commands the whole time. Cut it. Faster. Move. Then at the end, you said, please. Maggie was quiet for a moment. She looked at her coffee. I was scared, she said. The please slipped out. Rex nodded. I don't do please much, she said. It's not a weakness thing. It's just not how I'm wired. She looked at him. But I meant it. Rex sat with them. She looked at him with a directness that was characteristic of her. Why did you come back? She said. It was the same question she had asked in the van, but the context was different now. Quieter the question sitting in morning light rather than desert smoke. He had given her the honest answer, then I don't know. He had been thinking about it since. He had arrived at something that was more specific, though it was not a simple answer. You screamed, he said, not asking for help, just the sound of something that knew it was going to die. He looked at his bandaged hand. I have made that sound, he said, once. Not out loud, but inside, when I understood what my situation was going to be. He looked up at her. I knew what that sound was. I could not unhear it. Maggie looked at him. The room was quiet around them. The morning sounds continued through the walls. That's the most honest thing anyone has told me in a long time, she said. Rex shrugged. He did not know how to receive the statement without either deflecting it or making more of it than it was. Maggie put her phone face down on the table. She looked at him with an expression that was the most unguarded he had seen from her. Less of the hard-edged road captain and more of just a 19-year-old who had been upside down in a burning car yesterday and was reckoning with that. I need to ask you something, she said. Rex waited. What do you want, she said. Not in general, right now, in the next 6 months. What do you want your life to look like? Rex looked at her. He thought about the answer he had given Diesel. I don't know how to want things anymore. He thought about the night's inventory and the thing he had found when he pressed past the amputated wants to what was underneath. I want to stop moving, he said, just for long enough to find out who I am when I'm not surviving. Maggie looked at him for a long moment. Then she picked up her phone. She tapped something. She set it back down. I just texted my dad, she said. I told him Rex said yes. Rex looked at her. I didn't say yes to anything specific. I know, she said. He'll understand what it means. Rex sat back. He looked at the vest on the hook. He looked at the morning light on the floor. He looked at his hands bandaged and sore and present. Outside the windows, the lot was filling slowly with men starting their mornings. The sound of bikes being checked and conversations starting up in the specific early morning register of people who are comfortable with each other's presence even before they are fully awake. Rex listened to the sound of that. He thought, I am here. He let the thought complete itself this time without filing it away for later. The lawyer's name was Philip Roth, and he arrived at 9 in the morning looking exactly like what he was, a man who was very good at his work and had been doing it in service of people that most lawyers would not have in their offices. He was in his late 50s, slight and precise, wearing a jacket that fit well, and carrying a leather document case that he set on the table without flourish. Diesel introduced Rex without preamble. This is Rex. He has a juvenile runaway flag out of San Bernardino County, Barstow jurisdiction. Roth looked at Rex, not the way the highway patrol had looked at him with the particular professional assessment of a system sorting him into a category. More the way Doc had looked at him in the van as a situation with specific parameters that could be addressed. Tell me about the placement, Roth said. Rex told him about Garland. He told it the way he told everything without editorial, just the facts and the sequence of them. The group home on Barstow Road. The coffee mug. The blow to the ear. The decision to leave at night rather than report it and why he had made that decision. Roth listened without interrupting. He wrote 2 things in a small notebook and capped his pen. The man's name is Garland, Roth said. I don't know his last name, Rex said. I'll find it, Roth said. He looked at Rex. You're not going back to that placement. You're not going back to any placement under the current foster arrangement. He said this the way he said everything as a professional assessment of what the law permitted and what outcomes were achievable. There are 2 parallel issues here. The runaway warrant, which is resolved by the existence of cause which the incident with Garland provides, and the question of guardianship, which is the more complex of the 2. What does complex mean, Diesel said. It means it takes longer, Roth said. Not impossible. The precedent for emergency guardianship transfer in situations involving documented abuse is well established. The county will want a home study. There will be hearings. He looked at Diesel. You've been through this process before. Yes, Diesel said. The timeline is 2 to 4 months. In the interim, we request emergency non-custodial supervision, which is a designation that essentially means the county agrees not to actively pursue relocation while the guardianship process is pending. He looked at Rex. In practical terms, you stay here. You don't go to school right away, but we build an education plan that satisfies the county's requirements. You check in with the assigned caseworker who I will be present for. He paused. Does any of that present a problem for you? No, Rex said. That doesn't present a problem. Roth nodded. He looked at Diesel. I need the address of this location for the county record, and I need a designated contact in your club who can be the point of communication with the caseworker. Axel, Diesel said. Roth wrote this down. He picked up his document case. I'll file the initial petition this afternoon, he said. The warrant gets suspended pending the abuse investigation, which I am also opening today. He looked at Rex one last time. Do you have any questions? No, he said. Roth left. Rex sat across from Diesel at the table where Roth had been working. The room around them was quiet in the specific way it gets quiet mid-morning when the initial activity of the day has organized itself and the next set of business has not yet begun. You've done this before, Rex said. It was what Roth had implied. Once, Diesel said. A few years ago, a different situation. He did not elaborate and Rex did not press. Rex looked at the table. Why, he said. Diesel looked at him. Why what? Why put the machinery in motion, Rex said. You could have fed me and pointed me at the highway, and that would have been the debt settled. Diesel was quiet for a moment. He looked at his hands on the table. When you were cutting through that belt, he said, you could feel the heat from the firewall. Yes, Rex said. You kept cutting. Yes, that's the answer, Diesel said. He said it without emphasis, without inflation, as though it explained everything, and actually it did. Rex sat with that. The days that followed had the quality of a thing organizing itself the way water finds the lowest path through new terrain, not all at once, but gradually testing settling. Rex stayed in the small room at the back of the chapter house. He ate in the kitchen with Gordo, who cooked 3 times a day, with the unstated assumption that Rex would be present for all 3 meals. Rex was present for all 3 meals, without being asked twice. He learned the names. There were 19 members based at the Needles chapter house, with others coming and going as road business brought them through. He learned them by paying attention the same way he had learned the social grammar of every institution he had been in. But the grammar here was different from what he was used to. Institutions had legible roles and legible expectations and legible consequences. The chapter house had roles and expectations too, but they were transmitted in a different register through observation and implication rather than through posted rules and formal warnings. Colt, the sergeant-at-arms, was the first to give Rex a task. On the 3rd morning, he appeared in the doorway of the room and said, "Can you run a broom?" Rex said yes. He spent the morning sweeping the main room and the lot. He was not asked how he felt about this. He was not thanked. When he finished, Colt nodded once and walked away. Rex understood this to mean that the work had been acceptable. He filed it. The next day, Colt appeared again. "You good with tools?" Rex said he did not know. Colt took him to the maintenance bay at the rear of the property where 3 bikes were in various states of disassembly. He put a wrench in Rex's hand and showed him what to do and watched him do it and corrected him once and did not correct him again after that. Rex learned. He learned the way he had learned everything that had mattered to his survival, with his full attention, without vanity, about the learning curve, without performing competence. He did not have. He made mistakes. He corrected the mistakes. He asked questions when he did not understand something, and he did not ask questions he could answer by paying closer attention. Maggie watched this from the bench where she was spending her days, while the leg healed working logistics and planning and the ongoing administrative labor of the club that she apparently handled regardless of whether she was ambulatory. She watched Rex's progress in the maintenance bay with an expression that she kept neutral when he looked over, which he noticed. She was tracking him the way her father tracked things methodically and without announcing it. On the 5th day, she called him over at the end of the afternoon. "Colt says you're useful," she said. Rex sat down across from her. "Is that what he said?" "He said, and I'm quoting here, that you were not useless." She looked at him. That's high praise from Colt. For reference. Rex considered this. "What are you tracking me for?" he said. She looked at him. She had the quality like her father of not performing surprise. She had been expecting the question, or one like it, and she had her answer ready. "My father's a good man," she said. "He does things from feeling as much as from calculation. Sometimes that's right. Sometimes it needs someone else to check the work." "You're the check," Rex said. "I'm the check," she confirmed. She put her coffee down. "You're not what I expected either," she said. He recognized the echo of what Axel had said. "What did you expect?" he said. "Someone who needed more," she said. "Most kids your age who come through hard situations need more from the people around them. They need reassurance, they need structure that's visible, they need to test the edges of things. You're not doing any of that." Rex looked at her. "I don't need to test the edges," he said. "I've been outside the edges. I know what's out there." Maggie was quiet for a moment. "What's out there?" she said. Rex thought about Garland, about the Stockton group home, about the highway at 2 in the morning with the stars directly overhead and the road empty in both directions, and the complete specific absence of anyone who knew he was there. "Nothing," he said. "There's nothing out there that anyone wants." He paused. "That's not a complaint. It's just accurate." Maggie picked her coffee back up. She looked at him over the rim of it. "You know what this place is," she said. "It's not a charity, and it's not an institution, and it's not a family in the way that word usually gets used." "I know," Rex said. "What is it then?" she said. Not testing, genuinely asking what he understood. He thought about how to say it. He thought about the 19 men in the chapter house, their specific gravity with each other, the way a room organized around a problem, when a problem arose and then reorganized back to ordinary life when it was addressed. The way Colt had put the wrench in his hand without ceremony and expected him to figure it out, and he had figured it out, and that was the whole of the transaction. The way Gordo put a second plate in front of him without asking. "It's a place where what you do is what matters," Rex said, "not what you are in the system." Maggie looked at him for a moment. "Yes," she said, "that's right." The caseworker arrived on day 8. Her name was Sandra Briggs, and she was younger than the caseworkers Rex was used to, early 30s, with the specific exhausted competence of someone who was good at a difficult job and had not yet made peace with the limits of it. Axel met her at the front gate and walked her through the property with the particular courtesy of a man who understood that the situation required cooperation and was willing to provide it without warmth. Roth was present. He had come down from Needles that morning and was sitting at the table with his document case open when Sandra arrived. Rex sat across from Sandra and Roth at the table and answered the standard questions. They were the standard questions. What is your current living situation? Do you have regular access to food? Are you sleeping adequately? Do you feel safe? He answered yes to all of these and meant all of them. Sandra looked around the chapter house. She looked at Axel standing at the far edge of her field of vision as though making himself available without intruding. She looked at the patches on the men who moved through the room during the interview. She wrote things on her forms. At the end of the interview, she asked Rex if he would step outside for a moment. He stepped outside. He stood in the lot in the morning sun. Through the window, he could see Sandra and Roth in conversation, Sandra's body language, indicating she was raising concerns and Roth was addressing them methodically. He watched this without being able to hear it. Diesel came out of the side door and stood next to him. He did not look through the window. He looked at the lot and the fence and the desert beyond it. "She's concerned," Rex said. It was not a question. "She should be Diesel said. "This is not a conventional situation." Rex looked at him. "Is that going to be a problem?" Diesel was quiet for a moment. "Roth is very good," he said, "and the facts support us. The investigation into Garland's house turned up 2 additional reports from prior placements. Both of them filed, both of them inadequately actioned." He looked at Rex. "You were not the first." Rex stood with this. He had known it was probable in the abstract way that you know probable things, but the confirmed version of it sat differently. He thought about what it meant not for himself specifically, but for the arithmetic of how systems failed and who they failed and whether it was incidental or structural. He had a thought that he had not had before he wanted to do something about it. Not just survive it and leave. Do something with the knowledge of it. He did not say this out loud. It was too new and too undefined to say out loud. He filed it as something to come back to. Sandra came out through the front door. She looked at Rex and then at Diesel, and she made the specific expression of someone who is managing a situation that does not fit their standard framework and is doing so professionally. Mr. Holden, she said, I want to be clear that this approval is conditional. Understood, Diesel said. Monthly check-ins with me directly. Education plan in place within 30 days. And Rex has access to a phone and can contact me independently at any time. She looked at Rex. At any time, for any reason. Yes, Rex said. She looked at them both for a moment. She was doing her own version of the calculation, trying to determine whether what she was looking at was what it appeared to be or something else. Rex met her eyes. He was not trying to manage her. He was just present. Okay, she said. I'll file the conditional approval this afternoon. She looked at Diesel again. I will be back in 30 days. We'll be here, Diesel said. She left. Rex looked at the gate closing behind her car. He looked at Diesel. That went well, he said. That went well, Diesel said. The gathering that had been redirected from Needles because of the accident happened 3 weeks later, relocated to the chapter house and expanded. Chapters came in from Barstow and from Riverside and from 2 others further north, bikes filling the lot and spilling onto the street outside the property, holding perhaps 60 riders on the day of the main event. Rex had been told about the gathering in advance, given the option to stay or not stay as he chose. He chose to stay. He helped Gordo with the food prep starting at 5 in the morning. He helped Colt with logistics when the riders began arriving in late morning. He moved through the work without being asked to and was where he needed to be when he needed to be there, which was something he had always been able to do in environments that required it. He did not insert himself into the meetings and the formal business of the club. He understood the difference between the work that was his to do and the business that was not his yet. He stayed at the edges of the formal business and was present and useful for everything else. Around midday, Diesel found him in the kitchen helping Gordo plate food. Come outside for a minute, Diesel said. Rex wiped his hands and followed. The lot was full, and the energy of 60 men who had been riding and arriving and reuniting was in the air, loud and specific. Diesel walked Rex to the edge of the lot where the noise level dropped slightly against the chain-link fence with the desert visible through the woven slats. He turned to face Rex. In his hands, he was holding something. It was a leather vest, new and stiff. Leather not yet broken into the matte finish that came from years of wear. No patches on it, just the bare leather ready. Rex looked at it. We don't give these out, Diesel said. Not like this. You understand that? I understand that, Rex said. What I'm giving you is not membership, Diesel said. Not yet. You're 15. Membership is something you choose when you're old enough to choose it, and you want to understand what you're choosing. He held out the vest. What this is a place to be while you're figuring that out. It's what the men here wear. It says you're with us without making a commitment you can't understand yet. Rex looked at the vest in Diesel's hands. He looked at the empty back panel waiting. He thought about the moment on the highway when Diesel had reached down and taken his hand. He thought about the way he had felt the particular burning reflex that said, run, go completely quiet. He thought about the days in this building, the work and the food, and the sound of the bikes in the morning, and the specific quality of being seen by people who were not going to move him somewhere else. He thought about Sandra Briggs saying at any time for any reason and meaning it. He thought about Roth with his document case and his careful professional sentences. He thought about Axel's narrow assessment that had been finally a kind of respect. He thought about Maggie's short nod on the highway, the nod of equals, the first time anyone had ever looked at him that way. He thought about his mother on the 99 falling asleep at the wheel after a double shift, and how there was nothing dramatic about it, and how the absence of drama made it no easier. He looked at the vest. He took it. It was heavier than he expected. The way things made to last are heavier than things made to be disposable. He held it for a moment, feeling the weight of it, the stiff newness of the leather. The smell of it, that specific smell of unworked leather that was already beginning to mean something specific to him. He put it on. It was large on his frame, as it would be for some time, as the frame of a 15-year-old who had been underfed for 3 years had some growing still to do. He was aware of this. He was also aware that in a year or 2 or 3, it would not be large. The leather would soften and the frame would fill in, and they would meet each other in the middle somewhere. He stood in the lot in the empty vest and looked at Diesel. Diesel looked at him. The expression on his face was the one Rex had not had a word for on the highway and did not have a word for now, though he was closer to it. It was the expression of someone who was fully present in a moment that mattered. How does it feel? Diesel said. Rex rolled his shoulders. The leather moved with the motion. Honest, he said, which was the truest thing he could say, though it was not precisely a description of the vest. Diesel made the sound he made that was between a laugh and something else. He put one hand briefly on Rex's shoulder, and then he took it away, and he turned back toward the noise and activity of the gathering. Rex stood in the lot. Around him, the men of the Carrion Riders were doing what they did when they were together. They were arguing and laughing and working on things and eating and telling stories about situations that Rex did not yet know the context of. They were alive in the way that people are alive when they are with people they have chosen. The noise of it was specific and irreducible, and it was the sound of belonging in a way that Rex had spent 3 years learning to live without. He looked down at the leather vest. He looked at the empty back panel. He thought about what he had said to Maggie. I want to stop moving long enough to find out who I am when I am not surviving. He had said it on a bench in this building, and it had been the truest thing he had said in 3 years, and the most frightening thing he had said in 3 years, because it was the admission of a want that he did not know how to protect. He was still a little afraid of it. He thought he would be for some time. He also thought he might be done running. That evening, after the food was eaten and the formal business of the gathering was complete, and the riders from the other chapters had headed out, the chapter house settled into its usual after-dark register. The bar was open, the lights were lower, the conversations were easier, the specific ease of men who have spent a day doing what they do together and are now at rest. Rex sat at the booth that had become his booth over the weeks since the accident, the one in the far corner where you could see the whole room from one seat and the door from the other. He had his coffee. He had a book that Axel, in an unexplained and unremarked gesture, had left on his cot several days earlier, a fat paperback history of American labor movements that Rex had been reading with the concentrated interest he brought to anything that explained how people organize themselves under pressure. Maggie came over on her crutches and lowered herself into the seat across from him. She was getting better at the crutches, her movement through the room increasingly fluid, the awkwardness of the first days wearing off as she adapted to the mechanics of them. She looked at the vest Rex was wearing. She had seen it when he put it on that afternoon. She had not said anything then. She looked at it now. Good, she said. Rex looked at her. Your idea, he said. The timing was my idea, she said. The vest was his. Rex nodded. He looked at the room. At Diesel at the bar, his profile lit by the bar lights, talking to Gordo, with the ease of two people who have known each other a very long time. At Axel at the near table, his phone face up for once, watching something on the screen. At Colt, near the door, a glass of something amber in his hand, talking to one of the men from the Riverside chapter who had stayed late. He looked at Maggie. I've been thinking about something, he said. Tell me, she said. When Sandra was here, he said, she mentioned 2 prior reports about Garland that were filed and not actioned. He paused. How many kids have been in that house since those reports? Maggie looked at him steadily. I don't know, she said. How would you find out, he said. She was quiet for a moment, computing. Roth would know how to access the county placement records, she said, for the addresses that have active reports. Is that something Roth would do? Rex said, if someone asked. If my father asked, she said, yes. Rex looked at the table. He looked at his hands, the bandage on the palm nearly ready to come off, now the skin underneath almost healed. He looked at the booth's worn wood surface. I want to ask him, Rex said. Maggie looked at him. Not tonight, he said. I want to think about what I'm asking first. I want to understand what I'm asking him to do. He paused. But I want to ask. Maggie sat with this for a moment. She had the quality in moments like this of her father. The comfortable silence. The ability to let something be present without rushing to resolve it. Okay, she said. When you're ready. They sat. The room moved around them. The night outside the windows was full of the desert stars that came out in the Mojave with a completeness that you could not see from cities, a sky packed so densely with light that the darkness between the stars seemed like the exception rather than the rule. 3 days later, Diesel found him in the maintenance bay in the afternoon. Rex was alone. Colt had given him a task in the morning and left him to it, which was now the pattern. He was rebuilding the carburetor on a 1979 shovelhead that belonged to a member in the Riverside chapter who had dropped it off on his way through and would pick it up in 2 weeks. Rex had looked at the carburetor, then at the manual, then at the carburetor again, and had been doing this in sequence for most of the afternoon, making slow and careful progress. Diesel pulled a stool over and sat without being invited, which was how he did everything in his own building. He watched Rex work for a while without speaking. Rex was aware of being watched and did not perform unawareness of it. He just kept working. Roth called me this morning, Diesel said. Rex set down the tool he was holding. He looked at Diesel. Garland's license has been revoked pending full investigation, Diesel said. The county is pulling the other two kids from that house today. He paused. There will be hearings. Rex sat with Bues. He felt something that was not quite satisfaction and not quite relief, but was in that general territory. It was the specific feeling of an arithmetic problem that had been running in the background, resolving toward the correct answer. How many placements does he have on record? Rex said. 11, Diesel said. Over 7 years. Rex looked at the carburetor parts laid out on the workbench. He thought about 11 children over 7 years. He thought about the reports that had been filed and not actioned. He thought about the structural question he had been turning over since Sandra had mentioned those prior reports. I want to go to the hearing, he said. When there's a hearing. Diesel looked at him. As a witness? As whatever they'll let me be, Rex said. But I want to go. I want to say what I know about how the system works from inside it. He paused. Not about Garland specifically. That's Roth's job. I mean the broader thing. The fact that reports get filed and not actioned, and kids get moved and nobody aggregates the information. He looked at Diesel. Somebody should say that in a room where it can be heard. Diesel looked at him for a long time. You understand that does not make you safe, he said, testifying against a placement, being identified publicly. There will be people in the system who see it as a disruption and will push back. I know, Rex said. You've been disrupting things your whole life just by surviving in them, Diesel said. You understand this is different. This is choosing to be visible. Rex looked at him. I was visible on the highway, he said. 89 people saw me. The county social worker knows who I am. Roth has my real name in his files. He picked up the tool again. I'm already visible. I might as well do something useful with it. Diesel sat on his stool. He was quiet for what felt like a very long time. Rex let the silence be. He had learned over the weeks at the chapter house that Diesel's silences were not empty. They were the working silence of a man thinking something through that deserved to be thought through. Roth can prepare you, Diesel said finally, for the hearing, for what to say and how to say it and what the counter arguments will be and how to hold your ground against them. He looked at Rex. He's very good at that. I know, Rex said. I'll ask him, Diesel said. He stood up from the stool. He did not make more of the moment than it was. He moved toward the door of the maintenance bay, and then he stopped and turned back. The shovel head, he said. He looked at the carburetor parts on the workbench. You know what you're doing? Rex looked at the parts. He looked at the manual. He looked at Diesel. Not entirely, he said, but I'm figuring it out. Diesel looked at him with the expression Rex had still not found the perfect word for. He nodded once. He left. Rex turned back to the workbench. He picked up the tool. He bent over the carburetor and continued the slow, careful work of understanding how something that seemed complicated was actually composed of parts that were individually simple, and how if you took those parts one at a time in the right sequence, with enough patience and attention, the whole thing eventually made sense. The county hearing was held on a Tuesday morning at 6 weeks after the accident in a conference room at the San Bernardino County Administrative Building in Barstow. Roth was there in his good jacket with his document case. Sandra Briggs was there, her expression carrying the professional neutrality of someone who had done her own preparation. There were 3 county officials behind the central table, one of whom Rex recognized from his case files as the supervisor who had overseen his last 2 placements. Diesel was in the hallway. He was not allowed in the room for the formal testimony, but he was in the hallway. Rex had seen him there when he arrived. Rex sat at the table across from the county officials and answered their questions about his experience in the system. He answered the questions about Garland directly and without editorial. He answered questions about the other placements. And then Roth, who had structured the session with the precision of someone who did this for a living, opened the floor to the statement Rex had prepared. Rex read from notes because Roth had told him to read from notes rather than try to speak from memory, because reading from notes made the words more durable in a formal record. He talked about what the system looked like from inside it. He talked about the difference between a system designed to process cases and a child who was living in the gap between processing cycles. He talked about the specific way that information failed to aggregate across placements, how each new placement started from near zero on the question of what a child had experienced before, how the reports that got filed were not reliably communicated to the people making the next placement decision. He talked about the effect of this on the children. It saw it not in dramatic terms and functional terms, the specific way it shaped decisions and behaviors and what you learn to want and not want. He did not perform distress. He did not try to make them feel what he had felt. He presented the structural analysis, the architecture of failure, the places where the system was doing what it was designed to do, and the places where what it was designed to do was insufficient to the actual task. He was 15. He spoke for 22 minutes. When he stopped, the room was quiet. The county supervisor in the center of the table looked at him for a long moment. She was a woman in her 50s with the specific expression of someone who has managed systems for a long time and has heard many things in formal proceedings and occasionally hears something that recalibrates something. She recapped her pen. "Thank you, Rex," she said. It was not the procedural thank you of a formal proceeding. It was something else. He noted the difference. Roth collected his documents. Sandra was writing something on her pad. Rex sat and let the room be quiet for a moment. Then he stood up. He walked out of the conference room into the hallway. Diesel was standing against the wall with his arms crossed and his eyes on the door. When Rex came through, he looked at him the way he always looked at him, fully, without glancing away, with the full regard. "How did it go?" Diesel said. Rex thought about the room, about the supervisor's expression when he stopped speaking, about the 22 minutes and the specific quality of the silence that followed them. "I think it went well," he said. He was not inflating this. He genuinely thought it had. "I said what needed to be said. I said it clearly. I don't know what they do with it." Diesel looked at him. "You did the part that was yours to do," he said. "Yes," Rex said. Diesel pushed off from the wall. He looked down the hallway toward the building's exit, the fluorescent light giving way to the natural light beyond the glass doors. He looked back at Rex. "You hungry?" he said. Rex looked at him. "Constantly," he said, which was true and which made Diesel make the sound that was between laughing and something else. They walked out into the Barstow morning. The lot was bright under the desert sun, the same sun that had pressed down on Rex on Highway 58 weeks ago, the same sun that had baked the asphalt and the chrome trim and the burning Mustang and the two of them lying in the dirt on the highway shoulder. The same sun, the same desert. And Rex standing in it in a leather vest with an empty back panel and the thin scar across his palm and his feet in boots that fit him now, and his stomach empty because it was almost always empty. And that was simply the honest truth of what 15 felt like when you were actually living in your body rather than running from everything around it. He walked to the truck where Maggie was waiting in the passenger seat with the window down her leg in its diminishing splint. She looked at him when he got in. "Well," she said. "I said what needed to be said," he said. She looked at him for a moment. She looked at Diesel getting into the driver's seat. She looked back at Rex. "Good," she said. The truck pulled out of the lot. They drove west on Barstow Road past the south end of town, past the turnoff that Rex did not look at but was aware of in the way you are aware of things you are leaving behind. They got on the 40 East, headed toward Needles, toward the chapter house, toward the boot-scuffed floor in the bar, and Gordo's kitchen, and the particular sound of 89 sets of bike keys on hooks by the door. Rex looked out the window at the moving landscape, the creosote and rock and open sky. He thought about the day he had walked out of Garland's kitchen and into the desert night, the road empty in both directions, the stars overhead, indifferent and immense. He thought about what it had felt like to be that kind of alone, not the momentary alone of a quiet room, but the structural alone of a person who has no one whose decisions they factor into, no one who factors them. He was not that anymore. He did not make a production of the thought. He just let it be true quietly, the way true things are true when they are not being performed. The desert moved past the window. The 40 stretched east toward Needles, toward the mountains beyond it, toward all the territory that began after the place you thought was the end and turned out not to be. Rex watched it. He had somewhere to be. That was not a small thing. It was in fact everything. The world had taught him to look away when the fire got too hot. 3 years of the system and the highway and the places in between had taught him to reduce his expectations to the distance between himself and the exit. He had walked into the fire anyway. Not because he was brave. He would be the first person to tell you he was not particularly brave. He was just someone who had heard a sound he recognized and could not unhear it. That was all. It had been enough. He had been thinking in the weeks since the accident about the nature of the thing that had happened on the highway. Not the rescue itself, which he had examined from every angle and understood as well as he was going to understand it. The thing he kept returning to was what came after. The specific shape of how a debt gets acknowledged between people who have no common language for it. The institutions he had grown up inside had their own systems for acknowledgement. Thank you letters written in the approved format, forms filed, completion of the relevant paperwork that documented that a thing had occurred and been received and could now be classified as closed. He knew those systems the way you know the grammar of a language. You have grown up speaking automatically and without the need to think about the underlying rules. What had happened on the highway was not that. He had been turning over the specific mechanics of the kneeling for weeks. Not the emotional content of it, which he had also been turning over, but in a separate part of his mind. The mechanics. 89 men, none of whom had any framework for what he was to them, no pre-existing category into which he fit, had performed a gesture of such specific and unreserved acknowledgement that the only word he had for it was the word he had spent 3 years avoiding because it implied a vulnerability he could not afford. The word was belonging. He was aware of the irony that the thing he had been most avoiding had been provided to him by the people he had most reason to be afraid of. He was also aware in the cool analytic part of his mind that he trusted more than the rest that the irony was not accidental. That the people who had provided it were exactly the people who could provide it because they operated by a code in which acknowledgement of debt was not optional. They had gone to their knees because the code required it, and because Diesel had led, and because every man present understood what the drag marks in the ditch meant. The emotion was real, but the mechanism was structural, and the structural quality of it was what made it durable rather than sentimental. He thought about this in the booth in the evenings with his coffee and his book and the room moving around him. He thought about how differently institutions and communities manage the question of what you owed each other. Institutions managed it through transaction. Discrete services exchanged for discrete obligations. You got a placement, you submitted to the rules. The rules were satisfied, the placement ended, the account was settled. Nothing personal, nothing durable, nothing that had any existence beyond the transaction itself. What the Carrion Riders had given him on the highway was not transactional. It was the opposite of transactional. It was the acknowledgement of a thing that could not be adequately measured or repaid, and therefore would simply be carried indefinitely, because that is what you do with debts of that kind when you are people who understand the weight of them. He did not know what to do with being carried. He had never been carried before. He had been processed and moved and managed, and occasionally by the better adults in the system genuinely tried to help. But carried was different. Carried meant that the people around you had taken on the weight of your existence as part of their own load and would continue to carry it not because it was their job or their legal obligation, but because the code that organized their lives required it. He thought he might be beginning to understand what it felt like to be worth carrying. This thought, more than any other, was the one he was most careful with. It was the most fragile thing. He had this nascent belief that he might be worth something to the people around him, and he handled it the way he handled the carburetor parts in the maintenance bay, with attention and without forcing anything, knowing that the process would take as long as it took and that rushing it would only produce damage. He was patient. He was 15 and had run out of everything else many times. Patience was what he had left when everything else was gone, and he had learned to make it work for him. The weeks between the accident and the gathering had their own texture, a texture he was still learning to read. The chapter house ran on rhythms that he was slowly internalizing, the rhythms of men who had been living in proximity for a long time and had developed the specific efficiency of shared space managed by unwritten agreement. Certain things were done at certain times, not because anyone said to do them, but because the house ran better when they were done, and the men who lived in it had long since internalized that fact. Rex fit himself into these rhythms carefully, the way you fit yourself into a current without fighting it. He watched what needed doing, and he did it before being asked, and he did it to the standard that the house maintained, which was higher than it might appear from the outside, because the outside was worn and unpretentious, and the standard was about function rather than appearance. Things were clean because clean things work better. Things were organized because organized things were findable. The logic was entirely practical, and Rex understood practical logic better than he understood any other kind. Gordo noticed, not in the way that the caseworkers and teachers in his previous life had noticed things about him with the particular tilt of head and production of concern that meant they were filing an observation into a category. Gordo noticed the way a man who has worked alongside other men for many years Notice his competence by the simple fact of its presence without commentary, without performance. He began leaving things for Rex to do in the kitchen as if it were understood that Rex would do them, and Rex did them, and that was all there was to it. Colt noticed differently. Colt's noticing was closer to assessment, a continuous recalibration of an initial evaluation in the light of new data. Rex observed this recalibration happening through the quality of the task Colt gave him, which increased in complexity at a pace that Colt set without announcing, and Rex matched without comment. By the end of the second week, Rex was doing work on the bikes that Colt did not need to supervise, which Rex understood to mean something. The only person who talked to him explicitly about any of this was Maggie, which was consistent with what he had come to understand about her. She was, of all the people in the chapter house, the one most likely to say the thing directly, rather than let it be communicated through the texture of events. She had her father's intelligence, but not his preference for oblique communication. Where Diesel would let a truth settle into a silence and let you find it yourself, Maggie would simply state it in the expectation that you could handle a direct statement. He appreciated this about her. He had spent 3 years in environments where people communicated indirectly because direct communication implied a level of investment that the institutions did not have the capacity for. After 3 years of that directness was a form of respect. He was beginning to understand working through her own version of what had happened on Highway 58. She had been upside down in a burning car, and a stranger had come back for her. She had been a road captain of the Carrion Riders California chapter for a year, and she had needed to be pulled out of a ditch by a starving 15-year-old. She was processing that in the specific way that Maggie processed things, which was not by talking about the feeling, but by talking about the event, its mechanics and implications, extracting from it the information it contained, and filing that information in the architecture of who she was. She talked to him about the accident, sometimes in the evenings at the booth, in the way that people talk about something that has become important enough to look at steadily. She asked him technical questions about how he had gotten the trim piece to work on the belt, how he had managed the heat from the firewall, what he had been thinking when he shifted his grip to her waistband rather than the vest. She asked these questions with the focused curiosity of a person who was doing a technical debrief, understanding a failure mode in order to reduce the chance of its recurrence. He answered them the same way she asked them directly and without drama. He told her what he had done and why he had done it, insofar as why was available to him, and in the cases where why was not available, he said so. She respected this. The "I don't know" was always received as more useful than a retrospective construction of motivation. He was coming to understand very little patience for stories people told about themselves that made the story neater than the reality had been. He thought about this as a quality. He thought about it as something he recognized from the inside. Roth began preparing him for the hearing 2 weeks after the conditional approval came through. They sat at the table in the chapter house, Roth with his small notebook, Rex with the particular focused attention he brought to anything that required him to understand a system and then perform within it. Roth was a good teacher in the specific way that lawyers who are very good at their work are good teachers. He explained the structure of the proceeding not as a series of rules to follow, but as a logic and internal coherence that produce certain outcomes when engaged with in certain ways. Understanding the logic made the rules navigable in a way that memorizing the rules alone would not have. Rex understood this distinction intuitively. He had always learned systems by understanding their logic rather than their surface rules. The surface rules of the foster care system had been many and various across his 4 placements and not always consistent. The underlying logic of the system had been the same in all of them, and understanding that logic had allowed him to navigate it far more effectively than the kids who tried to follow the surface rules. What Roth was teaching him about the hearing was the same kind of thing. The surface structure of a county administrative hearing had its formalities, its procedures, its specific language conventions. The underlying logic was that the people behind the table were there to produce an outcome, and they had a preference for outcomes they could defend to their superiors. Giving them an outcome they could defend was therefore not the same as giving them what they wanted emotionally. It was giving them something that worked within their system. Rex thought about what he had to offer in those terms. He had personal experience with the system. He had 4 placements and 3 years of specific observations about how information moved or failed to move through the structures that were supposed to protect children in the system. He had the observations of someone who had been inside the machine and had been paying attention. Roth told him to talk about the observations rather than the feelings. He was not dismissive of the feelings. He was precise about their utility. The feelings, he explained, were real and valid, and the people behind the table would believe them. But feelings did not produce the kind of structural change that Rex had said he wanted. Structural change required structural argument. He needed to describe the architecture of the failure, not the experience of being failed. Rex had listened to this and understood it immediately because it was consistent with the way he had been thinking about the system for 3 years. He had not had the vocabulary for structural argument. He had had the observations and the analytic instinct. Roth was giving him the vocabulary. He spent the week before the hearing writing his statement in the evenings. He wrote it several times, each version more focused than the last, cutting out the parts that were personal without being structural, keeping the parts that served the argument. He showed each version to Roth, who made small, precise suggestions. He showed the second to last version to Maggie, who read it at the booth with her coffee and then looked at him and said it was good and meant it. He did not show it to Diesel. He was not sure why. He thought it might be because Diesel's approval mattered to him in a way that made him unwilling to need it for this particular thing. He wanted to do this one without that kind of support, not to prove something to Diesel, but to find out something about himself. He wanted to know if he could do it, and the only way to find out was to do it without the safety net of the one person whose opinion he had come to weight most heavily. He went to the hearing alone except for Roth. Diesel was in the hallway. That was Diesel, Rex thought, when he saw him standing against the wall outside the conference room. Present enough to be there if needed, far enough back not to be the reason the thing worked. Rex had walked into the hearing room and sat down at the table and done the thing he had prepared to do. He had spoken for 22 minutes in a conference room in Barstow about what the inside of the foster care system looked like from the inside, and the room had been quiet when he stopped, and the supervisor had recapped her pen and said thank you in the way that meant something, and then it had been done. He walked out into the hallway and Diesel was there, and they walked out into the morning together, and Maggie was in the truck, and they drove back to Needles on the 40 with the desert going past the windows, and Rex thinking about the supervisor's expression when he stopped speaking, the way a face looks when it has received information it did not have before and does not yet know what to do with. He thought he had done something useful. He would not know for a while whether he was right about that, but he thought he had. The truck moved east on the 40, and the desert opened up around them, enormous and indifferent, and in its own way, as honest as anything Rex had encountered, the landscape that did not care whether you survived it or not, but offered itself to you exactly as it was without decoration or apology. He had walked through it 8 weeks ago, hungry and afraid and alone, and it had not killed him. He was driving through it now in a truck, in a leather vest with the people he had come to think of as his, and the desert was the same desert it had always been, and he was not the same as he had been, and that was the whole of it, and it was enough.